this.
In this video, you see East Berliners cheering and celebrating as their pleas for freedom from the East and pleas for reunification from both sides of the wall, the East and the West, were heard and answered on the historic night of November 9, 1989. For the first time in over 30 years, East and West Germans alike were able to celebrate together as a reunited people with their friends, families, and communities they were previously separated from. On the evening of November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall unofficially fell, symbolically ending the USSR's occupation of the German Democratic Republic. After World War II ended, the four Allied countries, the United States, Great Britain, France, and the Soviet Union, divided Germany and split the territories amongst themselves, with the Western powers combining and forming a region known as the Federal Republic of Germany. With tensions soaring as the Cold War dragged on, the Soviets built the infamous Berlin Wall as a protection method to keep in communism and keep out democratic ideas encouraged by the West. When the wall fell, a new frontier was established and developed: the end of communism in Europe as the world knew it and the rise of democracy throughout
To understand
Europe.
what led up to this night, you have to go back in time to the late 1940s, specifically the end of World War II in Europe. Germany, once the head of the Axis powers, was now a country in ruin, with buildings pummeled into the ground and many mouths to feed. The first people to enter Berlin were the Soviets in May of 1945. The Americans, the English, and the French soon followed. Upon meeting, the Allies decided to divide the country into 4 sectors, one for each ally, with the plan of reunification of the whole country of Germany in the decades to come. Life in the different sectors began to flourish, and there weren't many problems except for one. The Soviet Union, instead of focusing on rebuilding like the others, began exploiting the resources in their territory and building a workforce to help exploit the resources for the rest of the USSR. This left many East Germans unhappy, and as there was little restraint, they just left and crossed over to the West. Because of this, the economy of East Germany began to dwindle, as many essential workers, like factory workers among other laborers, were leaving to build a life in West Germany. At the same time, another crisis was beginning to come into play. As the Cold War had just begun, distrust was rising between the West and the East. As tensions began to boil over, a new protection method was taken by the Soviet Union. From the night of August 12th to the early morning of August 13th, 1961, soldiers of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, laid down over 30 miles of barbed wire stretching almost the entire length of the Soviets' territory. As people awoke, they found their lives torn apart with the separation of their family, their friends, and even their communities. Despite the West's threat to put a trade embargo on East Germany, nothing could stop them. The main reason was that the territory of West Berlin truly belonged to the Soviets, who had agreed to leave it as it was a key meeting place for the West's leaders. The West, defeated, couldn't do anything. The wall soon expanded along the whole territory of East Germany and grew to include cement walls, more barbed wire, guard towers, machine guns, and even landmines in certain areas. Between 1961 to the fall of the wall in 1981, an estimated 140 people died trying to cross from the east into the west. The Soviet Union, a strong country with communist ideals, yet on the inside things were not as they seemed. Shortages of food and clothing, among other basic necessities, plagued the USSR. On the inside, the Soviet Union was collapsing as many countries within the Union began protesting their dictators and rebelling against communist dictatorship. All in all, this led up to mass frustration and protest. This was the very case for East Germany. Many people were fed up and tired of the separation. Even Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, himself later stated in his memoir that upon his visit to the GDR in the summer of 1989, people were chanting, "Gorby, make love not walls, and please Gorbachev, stay the course." The course they are referring to is the plan to reunite Germany. As the governments on both sides, the East and the West, failed to see through their promise of reunification, the people took it into their own hands. Around 4 months later, on November 4th, 1989, 500,000 people gathered in the center of East Berlin as a sign of protest against the communist government and as a plea for reunification. 5 days later, on November 9, 1989, a press conference occurred in which Günter Schabowski, the spokesperson for the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, said visas to travel to the West were now easily accessible and travel permits will be easy to obtain. Hundreds of thousands of people on both sides of the wall flocked to see the checkpoints being opened and people being allowed through. For many, this was an emotional experience as this wall had separated families and entire communities for a generation. That night changed the course of history and made it what we know it today. That night, East and West Germans together began to knock down parts of the wall and force open other barriers. That night was also the night when guards on both sides of the Brandenburg Gate left their posts and allowed East and West Berliners to dance hand in hand around the Brandenburg Gate for the first time in so long. Germany was officially reunited in October of 1990 after being divided by a giant wall for almost 30 years, and the Soviet Union officially fell just a year later on December 26, 1991. The celebrations came to an abrupt end when the country's situation was reviewed. East Germany, upon the fall of the wall, adopted all of West Germany's laws, rules, currencies, and even their customs. But once the situation was reviewed, the East was doing a lot worse than the West. Within 4 years of the collapse of the wall, companies all over East Germany were going bankrupt, resulting in millions of people losing their jobs. In 1994, only 18% of East Germans were working in the same place as they were in the years before the wall fell. Towards the beginning of the 2000s, the press also quickly turned against East Germans, and they began to slander them all over the news. They called East Germans neo-Nazis and Stasi officers, among other insulting names. Anytime an East German would speak out about the difficulties in their life and how hard life was still in the East and the hardships they faced as East Germans would be labeled a Jamarasi, the whining East German. Even today, East Germany still has it harder than the West. In the East, the GDP per capita is 20% lower than that in the West, and salaries and wages are also 15% lower in the East. Despite these negative impacts, a government survey found that in 2019, 59% of East Germans are happy with their personal life, compared to the only 18% in 1991. East Germany is also growing, and despite the fact that there are few corporate companies located in the East, the economy in the East is improving every year, and their representation in government is too. The recent ex-Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, was born and raised in East Germany. But despite all these negative effects, many East Germans today are happier knowing that the wall has fallen and are every day remain grateful for the freedom they have and their right to live in a democracy.
If the Berlin Wall hadn't fallen, the Soviet Union might still be around and communism might still have a strong presence in Europe. But the Berlin Wall did fall, and its fall revolutionized Europe, as it further weakened the Soviet Union and was a major stepping stone towards the end of communism in Europe. This memorable event even led to the spread of democracy and even encouraged many other countries that were part of the Soviet Union to continue protesting their communist dictatorship. The fall of the Berlin Wall was a frontier in its own right, as it united Europe, helping connect a nation divided for over a generation, and led to the fall of communism. This frontier also brought hope to families and friends divided and brought hope to Germany as a country, that the two halves of Germany, the East and the West, may finally become one.